First, though, we want to take a look at the Ukrainian economy and specifically the prospects of a default. So I'm joined now by Tom Coupe, Associate Professor and Senior Economist at the Kyiv School of Economics, and Devin Ackles of VoxUkraine Ukraine analyst.
Who's also a part of our team.
Who's a part of our team.
And we're happy to have him in this.
Well, but we're having him put on some different shoes to talk about things here first. My question to you, Tom, though, first, just because default is a big, scary word, but I don't think everyone knows what it means, and I think especially people who live in a lot of Western countries maybe have heard of it but haven't experienced it. So what is a default?
It has many meanings. Kind of the scary meaning is the country suddenly stops paying its kind of debt, simply stops. The more wide definition is from the moment that the country agrees with its creditors that it will restructure the debt and it will pay less than originally agreed, that's also default.
So it's like a bankruptcy for a country. It's
like a bankruptcy, but it's not. It's a bit kind of, if you simply agree with your creditor that you will pay less than you initially agreed, that's also considered by the ratings agencies as a default. So it's not really that suddenly you cannot pay anything anymore. You also just agree on friendly terms with your bank that you will pay a bit less.
Now you're making this sound quite nice. Like for a country that owes money, or for me, if I owe a lot of money to someone and I can say nicely with you and sit down and be like, you know, I owe you a couple $100,000. Would it be alright if I just paid you a couple $1,000?
Well, it doesn't have to be a couple of thousand. They can say, okay, maybe I'll pay you 80,000 or 70,000.
But that's quite good for me. So why are people worried about Ukraine? What's bad about it?
Yeah, and the point is that how probable is that? How likely?
How likely? Kind of, if you look at the financial markets, the probability of default, it's like 20%. That's kind of the latest data that I saw was kind of the markets price it as is the chance that there will be a default within a given year would be 20%. So that's high in international standards. That's high, but that doesn't mean for sure there will be a default. And again, a default also is just a restructuring, even a friendly restructuring. Like in 2000, there was a default in Ukraine. It didn't mean that suddenly Ukraine said, we're not going to pay. No, they said kind of, okay, we are in trouble. Let's sit together and agree to kind of restructure our debt.
But correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, some of it with the default also seems to be the faith that the international markets, you know, all of them lenders have in a local economy. And in Ukraine, part of the issue that we have a graph from the Economist where they show Ukrainian foreign reserves, which have been going down consistently, which ideally, and not an economist, but I do my best here, ideally you want 2.5 months, right, of imports, you want to have that.
Right,
or more.
The more the better, yes.
But Ukraine doesn't have that, and it's been going down.
Yes. And that's exactly the fear, that it will go down further and further, and that at some point they don't have anything anymore. Because indeed, the foreign investors, kind of whoever at some point invests in Ukraine, now wants their money back, and the sooner the better. And so that's why you have to create reserves that people will not fear that the hryvnia will continue to devaluate. And once kind of Ukraine is able to maybe together with the kind of reforms, kind of doing reforms internally by getting money from the IMF, more money from Europe and the World Bank, if they can signal that okay, they're now back in control, the hryvnia will not continue to fall, then indeed kind of the foreign investors might come back again and might support the Ukrainian economy and might bring reserves in that way to the
But I mean, if short term, if Ukraine were to default, it seems likely that the hryvnia would fall even lower, right?
That's kind of a likely consequence. Kind of at the same time, I think if you look at the past histories of the defaults, and also if you look at kind of how bad the situation is already now, then even if there is a default, it should not be that much of a surprise anymore. So kind of now everybody is already talking about default. We are here talking about default. So financial markets already take that into account. So this is different from suddenly there is a surprise, nobody expected, there is a default, then everybody runs. And if you kind of announce, if you kind of agree with the creditors that they will kind of, can we restructure that, then things can calm down in a much better way.
Devin, but that is also bringing you to the discussion, but does it make sense why, while giving all the financial aid the international partners of Ukraine's do, why they would allow it? Does it make sense at the same time to really allow it happen?
Okay, so yeah, the expectation, I didn't see the 20% figure regarding the default yet, but right now, obviously, the international community has put a lot of money, especially in the past year, into Ukraine, around $17 billion.
Is it a lot on international term? I don't understand. Because with this
for Ukraine,
figure, you don't understand.
that's a fairly large amount for Ukraine.
For Ukraine and internationally?
For the size of its economy, and that depends on the economy, and there's a lot of circumstances that go along with that. So it's a case-by-case basis. So this year, the expectation originally was around 15 million. That's what the IMF had said, or sorry, billion, 15 billion. But that figure is being readjusted a little bit, and it's probably going to go up, 20 billion. There's nothing clear just yet. They're trying to put a package together. So what's going on with Ukraine as far as regarding the default? It doesn't seem realistic at all. Right now that they're going to allow them to go into default. I mean, it's not just, some experts' opinion about this, and many experts agree they're not going to let them do it, but it's not in the best interest of the United States right now to do it, EU, or the IMF. Because what would it do? It would essentially destabilize the situation more here, and therefore, it would take a lot longer for Ukraine to resettle itself. Plus, there's a war going on, obviously. Can't deny that. So I don't believe right now it's going to happen.
Well, I think that's part of the issue. It's I want to, for me, what it comes down to, and the reason I want to bring it to, is this issue of confidence. And part of this idea is, with a war going on, it's very hard for Ukraine to put money where it needs it, and also that it's not a black hole, that it's there. And we have one tweet where we kind of put out a question: should Ukraine get massive international bailout despite a lack of reforms? And we got a response from Louis G, who says, no. When half of the present government is as corrupt as before, why give them more money? And this isn't a sentiment that we're just having in Twitter. We love Twitter, but not just there. There is an op-ed in the New York Review of Books from George Soros, where he was advocating that Europe needed to take the lead and giving more money, because just the IMF bailout alone probably isn't enough. The EU needs to give more than that. But then you got a response from Leonid Bachitsky, who is in Bloomberg, where he was saying, this can't go on. That if it's a black hole, you can't just throw money at this problem. It doesn't make it go away. I mean, what is your impression? I mean, with the budget that recently came out, was it business as usual? What sort of a culture was the new budget passed in, and what a message did it send to financial markets and to the IMF?
Well, after looking at the budget myself, and several other experts, Ukrainian experts, and certainly IMF has already gone through it who knows how many times since they came here January 8th. Really, it was, a lot of people have been saying it's overly optimistic. They think
they're going to have a lot more money and more growth than they will, right?
Yes, and
optimism sounds nice.
Yeah, it does sound nice, but the issue here is that the figures there, it's hard to believe that the government even believes in those figures. For example, one of the things
padded,
that
basically.
Well, the idea
you can't say
is,
that. I can say it. It seems this is what everyone is saying, that it's expected on all this growth, so they're not expecting to have to borrow a lot of the money. They think they're going to make it themselves, right, which is very hard if other people don't agree with you.
So let's be realistic about this. Since 2008, since the financial crisis hit Ukraine pretty hard, IMF came in, helped them. They got a lot of support to kind of get back on their feet. They've actually never reached their pre-2008 level for GDP. So since that time, essentially, although things have gotten better until roughly 2012, they've gone back into a recession. I mean, they've been in a recession the whole time, but things were starting to improve until roughly 2012, and then things started to go back down again. And, the IMF is seeing things getting better, roughly, and the World Bank as well, I believe, roughly in 2016.
That's true, but I want to bring it back to this leaky bucket analogy. Okay. Because they're involved, obviously, they will negotiate, they will talk, but the timing is so key for these loans. We can see that the value of the hryvnia, of the currency,
got 1 month basically worth of foreign currency reserves,
so
5
Ukraine
weeks.
Doesn't have time to wait. But with that, I mean, describe a little bit of when the budget was passed. It was passed at 4:30 in the morning?
4:30 in the morning, yeah. Ukraine, if you follow Ukrainian parliament, it's not entirely surprising, to be honest. They like to wait to the last minute and then wait till a minute after that.
One of the MPs said they didn't even know what was in the budget.
And a lot of them didn't. And this was one of the issues was, well, they passed it really late at night on basically a deal they made with Prime Minister Yatsenyuk that they'll pass the budget now, and they pass it by a minimal margin, 233 votes, when the minimum is 226, which means a lot of people who are in the coalition government didn't support the budget for reasons like you said. But the second issue is they did it basically based on a guarantee from Yatsenyuk that they would be able to there would be a revision of the budget on January 15th.
I mean, that sounds like something that's meant to please the IMF, other organizations, that they passed a budget, right? That's
exactly what it's always when we discuss with, let's say, foreign experts and the analysts, the budget, so like, oh, it's over-optimistic. But when you discuss it on the citizen level, so like, it's the toughest budget you can say. There are major cuts, and especially in the situation of the crisis, and especially in the situation of war, when sometimes the state just have to pay more for the rebuilding infrastructure and helping the many, many people. So why is this gap? Something like totally, is it really like to please the Western government?
There's a lot of issues within the budget. I mean, I don't have time to go through the whole thing right now, but, you know, for example, defense funding actually went up, spending went up, which is understandable. There's a war going on, defense spending should go up, as did law enforcement. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was a substantial amount, especially from 2 years ago when there was no real defense budget. But there were cuts. I mean, there were cuts to areas that long have been recommended to be cut. For example, the mining subsidies that last year accounted for about 11 billion hryvnia, this year are down to about 1 billion. So yes, the mines will feel that. Yes, the workers are predominantly in the Donbass, and a lot of those mines are actually in Ukrainian-controlled territory. They will feel that. But the subsidies going into there, they wanted to redirect those subsidies elsewhere and use that money for other programs. Yes, there are going to be cuts, but if you actually look at the overall social, like welfare package, social security, the other support mechanisms here for the needy, they've actually gone up. They've actually gone up around, I believe it's something like 20%. So their deficit for the pension fund, for example, has grown substantially. And they don't have money to cover that. And they're planning on covering their deficit, the money they don't have, by collecting more taxes. Well, how are you going to collect more taxes when most people are trying to avoid paying taxes right now because they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow? And there's a lot of easier way. I mean, corruption's actually gone up in Ukraine since the conflict began. And
I mean, since we're coming to this, like, these are scary things. Taxes scare people. Already under Yanukovych, there was a sense that, especially for small businesses, taxes were unfair, that it was squeezing people, making it very hard to stay open, favoring people with connections and chains. But I wanted to come back to this other point, because if I'm not mistaken, you'd written about the prospect of default, and you've written in the past, I believe, you know, about how it can be good for countries. It can be getting out of a bad situation, but that's not the case with Ukraine.
Well, I think it's kind of, I think what I wrote was more that it can be part of a general package of measures that can help the economy to relaunch. Because just as I said before, we need to have this break point, kind of where after that everybody can become actually optimistic based on kind of reasonable numbers. And so as part of that, it can be, it doesn't have to be, but it could be considered as part of such package.
But it seems like what's good about it is you can get a better deal. If you're having a bad deal that's crushing you, you could renegotiate to make it better.
But no, it's kind of, if everybody understands that the debt is not sustainable, then you have to do something. No, we can continue to muddle on and say, yes, we're going to do something. If nobody believes you, then it doesn't solve the problem.
But it seems like it's hard for Ukraine because people don't want to give Ukraine money. So do you think Ukraine will get a better deal if there was a default and they had to try and get, you know, renegotiate loans to pay their needs?
It's not about, I don't think it's a good deal. Nothing is good here. So of course it's nice if you can get a loan from somebody else at reasonable terms. That's the best solution you can have. Right. So of course it's nicer if the foreign donors, IMF, come with more money. I think everybody kind of would realize or would kind of accept that's nicer. But if they don't want, then you have to find other ways.
But then what? You know, when you understand that there is a situation when there is a conflict, there is the real, like, huge bulk of infrastructure destroyed, and there is a need for additional money, and everybody expects but wants Ukraine to perform better. And what the country can do, in what kind of reforms may help?
Well, I think the reforms have been clear.
I mean, being like more or less precise.
At least a decade. First of all, tax reform is a big thing, and they passed a series of. They passed a law where they reduced the number of taxes from 22 to, I believe, 9. And that's good. But the problem is they've also penalized big business a little bit more than before because they're looking for reliable taxpayers. They don't have reliable taxpayers right now. So they're putting it on, for example, big business because they know big business is easier to find their accounts, to deal with them. They can harass them and get more money out of them. You know, it's nothing over the top. But to be able to deal with the overall problems that the budget's facing, they're expecting a 30% increase in tax collections.
During a recession.
During a recession.
Of 7%?
I mean, that number is, you know, it's almost laughable in a way because no one really believes that. And I personally don't believe that the government believes that.
And you brought that up before because you were making a point that some people believe that this is an attempt to make a budget that's so ridiculous, so laughable to the IMF that they redraw it themselves, and then the politicians then say, well, sorry guys, we tried, we wanted to give you all this great stuff. The IMF said no, we are dependent on them, so don't blame us, you know, hate the IMF.
And I think, and you know, that was kind of my personal assessment. I do kind of have that feeling because if you look at the budget, I mean, there are just so many areas where it actually contradicts what the IMF's previous demands, even before the crisis, were, and they kind of go against it. In fact, last week, the parliament, Ukrainian parliament, the Verkhovna Rada, passed a law that actually undid one of the pension reforms that was a key demand of the IMF, basically raising female pension age to 60. Now, it wasn't for all women that they brought it back down. It was actually for a certain class of government bureaucrats. It's 55. The law was passed in 2012. The law brought it up from, in 2012, it would start gradually bringing it up every single year till it hit 60, which is still 5 years below what would ideally be it for the International Monetary Fund and other places in the surrounding community in Europe, you know, say places like Belarus. But at the same time, you know, they've really just not shown that they're committed to making those reforms, and they do look like they want to pass the buck right now. And these populist, this populist budget and this pension reform, or the reverse of a reform, kind of shows that, kind of demonstrates that.
The most common thing in Ukraine for a previous decade was the budget was passed the next year, you know, like it was not the year. Now, what was special about that, it was like just a couple days before the New Year's Eve. At the same time, what we can expect with this IMF meeting, you know, with the loan, and yeah, so that would be.
Well, I've already kind of said my view on this, and I think it's reflected more broadly that the IMF is going to work with Ukraine to provide it with funding. Now, the terms of that funding are unclear right now. They came here on January 8th, I believe, and they should be finishing up their mission pretty soon, so we'll know the results very soon. But it's going to be how, and then how many, you know, how many times they give it to them. For example, the first package might be, there's already money from the European Union. There's $2 billion more coming from the United States, pending approval from the IMF's mission here. So there's going to be money here fairly quickly. It's already in the works. It's just how much and on what conditions. Last year, actually, when Ukraine was in really bad need of money, the provisional government did a very good job in the very beginning of just going down the list of IMF recommendations that had been there the year before. For example, raising the energy tariffs, how much people pay for gas in their house. They did it immediately. It was a political issue for maybe 10 years. No one wanted to touch it. They did it, and they can push these things through. Now that they have an even more powerful coalition in the government, they seem to be reluctant to do some of these things.
At the same time, what I've heard, at least from a different, like, international sources, that they are happy that the budget is there, and it's like it really sounds as that, and that there should be something at least to start, so what would be, you know, what would be your thing? Because I mean, Devin, you like really like it's. You said it's populistic, but it's something totally different from what I've heard often. I mean, it's definitely not perfect, but I hadn't heard that much criticism.
Well, I think kind of. It was approved, but then everybody agreed that within a 1.5 months they would rewrite it. So it kind of this leaves open everything, no? So, and I think that's what indeed the IMF mission is here now. They will rewrite it. They will come back with something different. Hopefully, something that is more convincing to everybody, because everybody makes the money kind of conditional on reforms. Like the US just promised more money if they do reforms, and so that's kind of also the IMF will say, right? If you do reforms, we'll give more money.
And I think the point behind that actually is it is a conditionality, but I think the rules have changed a little bit. First of all, I think the first tranche of money, the first kind of loan is coming, kind of regardless of if there's going to be real hard conditions set for it, because Ukraine's in a crisis situation now. But what's going to happen later is more important because, for example, last year Ukraine passed the whole package of anti-corruption laws. A lot of them very good, highly praised. A lot of civil society experts worked on it. By and large, good laws. Now, those laws haven't been implemented at all. Not one of them has been implemented. They're creating slowly the Anti-Corruption Bureau, but it's going to be a long process for them to even start getting things. Passing the law is one thing. Implementing them is another thing.
Well, I think that's something we'll want to look forward in the future. We have these laws, but part of the reason why we like having you here and looking forward is just seeing how it's developed and what's actually implemented and what effect it has. So thank you so much again for joining us.